Envision, for a split second, that deep within the Vatican's most heavily guarded vaults, there lies an undisclosed dossier, a file containing information so sensitive, so potentially devastating to the official narrative, that its mere existence could upend 2,000 years of Christian history. We are not dealing with unsubstantiated rumors here. We are talking about a documented historical case, supported by archaeological, testimonial, and textual evidence, pointing toward a historical reality systematically airbrushed from the record. Jesus' immediate family did not vanish into the ether after the crucifixion. In fact, according to multiple verifiable historical sources, his blood relatives were the torchbearers of the early Christian movement for well over a century. But here is the mystery we are cracking wide open today, operating as investigators of truth. Why does the genealogical trail of Jesus' family hit a brick wall abruptly in the 2nd century? What became of his brothers, his cousins, and, brace yourself for this, his possible direct descendants? The canonical Gospels clearly state that Jesus had siblings. Mark 6:3 names them unequivocally: James, Joses, Judas, and Simon. It also mentions sisters. Make no mistake, it's right there in your Bible. Yet, following the crucifixion, the trail of this family begins to blur in the official scriptures in an uncanny way, as though someone had deliberately ripped the pages out of a book. The historian Eusebius of Caesarea, widely regarded as the father of ecclesiastical history, wrote in the 4th century that Jesus' relatives, known as the desposini, meaning those who belong to the Lord, were high-profile figures in the primitive church. Hegesippus, another 2nd century Christian historian, documented that these bloodkin were relentlessly persecuted, interrogated by Roman emperors, and eventually silenced. What kind of information did they carry that proved so threatening? What truth about Jesus' possible descendants had to be buried forever? Today we operate as historical cold case investigators. We will scrutinize 9 concrete pieces of evidence, documents, archaeological breakthroughs, and testimonies from early Christians that reveal the forbidden name of a family branch the institutional church decided to wipe off the map. This is not an assault on faith. This is an inquiry into verifiable historical facts that deserve an honest examination. Because if you truly seek the truth, you cannot afford to fear the evidence. Let's open the dossier. The central question of this case is devastatingly simple. What happened to the direct descendants of Jesus? And why was their name systematically purged from every official record? Prepare yourself, because what you are about to discover, you will not hear in any Sunday sermon. Let's begin with evidence number 1, the systematic pattern of genealogical omission in the canonical texts. When you examine the Gospels with a detective's eye, something strange emerges. Matthew dedicates an entire chapter, 17 verses, to tracing Jesus' lineage from Abraham to Joseph. Luke does the same, going back even to Adam. Both evangelists considered Jesus' ancestry important enough to document meticulously. However, after the crucifixion, the genealogical silence is deafening. The Gospels mention Jesus' brothers in several passages. Mark 6:3 records that the people of Nazareth said, "Is not this the carpenter, the son of Mary, the brother of James and Joses, and of Judas and Simon? And are not his sisters here with us?" John 7:5 admits that even his own brothers did not believe in him during his ministry. Acts 1:14 reveals that after the resurrection, all these with one accord were devoting themselves to prayer, together with the women and Mary, the mother of Jesus, and his brothers. So far, all documented in canonical texts. But notice what happens next. These siblings simply melt away from the official narrative like ghosts. James, Jesus' brother, appears briefly in Acts as the leader of the Jerusalem church. Paul mentions him in Galatians 1:19, calling him James, the Lord's brother. And then, nothing. His death is mentioned in a single line by Josephus, the Jewish historian. James, the brother of Jesus, who was called the Christ, was executed in 62 AD by order of the high priest Ananus. And the other brothers? Joses, Judas, Simon? Absolute silence. And Jesus' sisters, whose existence the Gospels confirm, we don't even know their names. Now, this would not be odd if we were speaking of irrelevant people, but we are discussing the immediate family of the founder of Christianity. In any major religious or political movement, the leader's family is documented exhaustively. Muhammad's relatives are meticulously recorded in Islamic history. The descendants of Moses and Aaron are precisely traced in the Jewish Tanakh. Buddha's kin were documented in Buddhist texts, but concerning Jesus, after 62 AD, it's as if his immediate family was scrubbed with a thick black marker from the historical archives, except for one detail the church could not entirely suppress. Eusebius of Caesarea, writing in the 4th century, quotes Hegesippus, a 2nd century Christian historian who had access to now-lost traditions. According to Hegesippus, Jesus' relatives, the Desposini, were prominent figures in the early church for generations. Hegesippus recounts that the Emperor Domitian, 8196 AD, ordered the arrest of all descendants of the house of David, fearing they would claim the Judean throne. Roman soldiers captured 2 grandsons of Jude, the brother of Jesus. Yes, you read that right. Grandsons of Jesus' brother. These men were brought before Domitian. The emperor questioned them about their possessions, and they showed their calloused farmers' hands. Domitian, seeing they posed no political threat, released them. Hegesippus adds that, after this, they were appointed as leaders of the churches, both because they were martyrs and because they were relatives of the Lord. This information is documented in Eusebius's Ecclesiastical History, 3rd, 19-20. Do you grasp the magnitude of this? Direct descendants of Jesus' family were leading Christian communities in the 1st century. A full-blown family dynasty existed. And then, mysteriously, around 135 AD, following the Bar Kokhba revolt, every last record concerning the Desposini vanishes, as if someone decided this information should no longer exist. We are living in days when prophecies are unfolding before our very eyes. But most still walk in the dark, trapped by incomplete truths that were carefully hidden from humanity for centuries. Now consider, what if precisely what was removed from the scriptures holds the answers you have been searching for all these years? Answers that can illuminate your path, strengthen your faith, and reveal the true purpose of Jesus' coming. That is why I prepared a powerful digital book for you. Why did the apostles conceal Jesus' most dangerous words? This book is not just a read, it is a spiritual awakening. A tool for those who wish to move beyond the superficial, break free from manipulation, and reconnect with the authentic Christ, unfiltered, undistorted, unburdened by human interests. Download it right now. It's available in the first pinned comment. But be warned, this content could be taken down at any moment. It contains spiritually sensitive revelations that make even religious leaders uncomfortable. Don't wait for the world to crumble to seek what your soul already knows it needs. Click now, download your copy, and let this truth begin to transform your life. And if you are among the first to download it, come back here and write Amen. That will be your act of faith, and perhaps today, God will open a door you never imagined was about to open. Let us introduce evidence number 2, the historical testimony about the Desposini, the family dynasty that governed the early church. The Greek word Desposini literally means those who belong to the Lord, or those of the Master. This technical term appears in early Christian sources, referring specifically to Jesus' blood relatives. And here is the fact you were never taught in Sunday school. During the first decades of Christianity, the Church of Jerusalem, the mother community of the entire Christian movement, was not led by Peter, nor John, nor any of the 12 apostles. It was led by Jesus' blood family. According to Eusebius, citing earlier sources, after the crucifixion, it was James, Jesus' brother, who assumed leadership of the Jerusalem community. Paul confirms this in Galatians 2:9, referring to James, Cephas, and John, those reputed to be pillars. Notice the order. James first. Acts 15 recounts the Council of Jerusalem, where the future of Gentile Christianity was decided. Who has the final word? It is not Peter. It is James who declares, "Therefore, I judge." Acts 15:19. When James was executed in 62 AD, who succeeded him? According to Eusebius, Ecclesiastical History 4:22-4, it was Simeon, son of Clopas, Jesus' cousin. Hegesippus specifically identifies him as another Desposinos. This family succession continued. The leaders of the Jerusalem church during the 1st century were predominantly Jesus' relatives. It was essentially a religious monarchy based on sacred lineage. Historian Robert Eisenman, professor at California State University, Long Beach, has extensively documented this reality in his work, James, the Brother of Jesus. According to Eisenman, the Desposini represented a charismatic authority based on kinship, a legitimacy that directly competed with the institutional authority that Rome sought to establish. Julius Africanus, a 3rd-century Christian chronicler, wrote, as cited by Eusebius, that the Desposini lived in the villages of Nazareth and Kokaba, and that they zealously preserved the record of their own descent. These family records were consulted by Christian leaders for generations. But there is something more disturbing in this testimony. Julius Africanus adds that Emperor Herod, wanting to conceal his non-Jewish origin, destroyed the genealogical records of the Hebrew families. Nevertheless, the Desposini managed to preserve their family archives. Until when? Until the Bar Kokhba revolt in 135 AD. After that date, the trail runs completely cold. The Desposini vanish from all historical records as if they had never existed. Some historians suggest they were exterminated during the brutal Roman repression of the revolt. Jerusalem was razed, renamed Aelia Capitolina, and Jews were expelled. Perhaps the Desposini perished in that Holocaust. But there is another unsettling theory, that they survived, dispersed, and their existence became inconvenient for a church increasingly institutionalized and controlled from Rome. Because if a family held the legitimate blood right to lead Christianity, what authority did the bishops appointed by Rome possess? In 318 AD, an extraordinary event occurred. According to the apostolic constitutions, a group of Desposini traveled from the Middle East to Rome to meet with Pope Sylvester II. They claimed their ancestral right to lead the churches, especially in Eastern territories. Sylvester rejected their petition. The institutional church had chosen the Roman model of apostolic succession based on ordination, not the Jewish model of family succession based on lineage. The Desposini returned to the East and disappeared definitively from official history. Did you know that James, the brother of Jesus, held more authority than Peter in the early church? This is never taught in churches. Tell me in the comments if this surprises you as much as it surprised me when I first discovered it. Now let us present evidence number 3, an archaeological discovery that shook the foundations of the official narrative. On March 28, 1980, in the East Talpiot neighborhood south of Jerusalem, construction workers accidentally discovered a rock-cut tomb dating to the 1st century. The Israel Antiquities Authority sent archaeologist Amos Kloner to investigate. Inside the tomb, they found 10 ossuaries, limestone boxes used to store bones after the body decomposed, a common Jewish practice between 20 BC and 70 AD. 6 of those ossuaries bore inscriptions in Aramaic and Greek. The names etched were Yeshua bar Yehoseph, Jesus son of Joseph, Maria, Mariamne, Mattia, Matthew, Yose, Joses, and the most perturbing of all, Yehuda bar Yeshua, Judah son of Jesus. Read that again. Judah son of Jesus. The ossuaries were catalogued and stored in an Antiquities Authority depot. Dr. Kloner published a technical report in the journal Atikot in 1996, considering the names too common to be significant. But in 2007, filmmaker Simcha Jacobovici and director James Cameron, yes, the Titanic director, produced a documentary titled The Lost Tomb of Jesus, presenting an explosive statistical analysis. Dr. Andre Feuerwerger, a professor of statistics and mathematics at the University of Toronto, calculated the probability of this specific combination of names appearing together in a 1st century family tomb in Jerusalem. His conclusion, the statistical odds favored 600 to 1 that this was the family tomb of Jesus of Nazareth. Now, this finding generated fierce controversy. Conservative academics such as Dr. Jody Magnus of the University of North Carolina argued that Jesus, being from Nazareth, would not have had a family tomb in Jerusalem. Dr. Kloner himself distanced himself from the sensationalist interpretations, but let us examine the facts coolly, like detectives, not as believers defending a position. Fact 1. The names on the ossuaries are authentic. No one disputes the antiquity or authenticity of the inscriptions. Fact 2. Yeshua bar Yehoseph, Jesus son of Joseph, is etched on one of them. Although a relatively common name, the combination Jesus, son of Joseph, is specific. Fact 3. Mariamne is the Hellenized Greek form of Mary. Significantly, the Acts of Philip, a 4th century Christian text, identifies Mary Magdalene specifically as Mariamne. Dr. François Bovon, professor at Harvard Divinity School, confirmed this connection. Fact 4. Joses was the familiar nickname of one of Jesus' brothers according to Mark 6:3, a diminutive not commonly used outside a familial context. Fact 5. The ossuary, Yehuda bar Yeshua, Judah son of Jesus, exists. It is catalogued. You can see it. And the question no one in the ecclesiastical hierarchy wants to answer is, if Jesus had no children, whose bones are these? Some critics argue that the names were common. True. But the specific clustering in a single family tomb is statistically significant. Dr. Richard Bauckham, in his study Jesus and the Eyewitnesses, analyzed the frequency of names in 1st century Judea based on ossuaries and documents. According to his data, Yeshua appears in approximately 3.9% of male names, Yehoseph in 8.3%, and Maria Mariam in 21.4% of female names. But when you calculate the probability of finding specifically Jesus, son of Joseph, plus 2 Marys plus Joses, plus Judah, son of Jesus in the same tomb, the numbers become unsettling. The tomb was sealed again, the ossuaries remain in storage, and the academic debate continues in silence far from pulpits and Sunday schools, because if the Yehuda bar Yeshua ossuary truly contains the remains of Jesus' son, then the history you were told your entire life has voids. Voids that someone decided you should not know about. You no longer have to bear that weight alone. Awaken to the forgotten truths with the digital exposé, why the apostles buried Jesus' most dangerous words. The link is right there in the pinned comment. Hit that button now and claim your copy before it vanishes. Let us present evidence number 4, the Gnostic text that speaks directly about the intimate relationship between Jesus and Mary Magdalene. Picture this. A dusty December day in 1945. An Egyptian farmer named Muhammad Ali el-Saman was scratching the desert floor near Nag Hammadi, looking for natural fertilizer, when his shovel clanged against a sealed ceramic jar. Inside were 13 leather-bound papyrus codices containing 52 ancient Christian texts. Among them was the Gospel of Philip. This text, written in Coptic and dated to roughly the 3rd century, though likely founded on 2nd century traditions, contains passages the Church absolutely never wanted you to read. Verse 63 states point blank, "And the companion of the Savior is Mary Magdalene." Christ loved her more than all the other disciples and used to kiss her often on her mouth. The other disciples were offended by this and expressed their disapproval. They said to him, "Why do you love her more than all of us?" Now, before you dismiss this out of hand as Gnostic heresy, let's consider the linguistic evidence. The Coptic word translated as companion is koinonos. Dr. Karen King, a leading professor at Harvard Divinity School, emphasizes in her analysis that koinonos translates to companion, consort, or partner in the context of a permanent, intimate bond. It's far beyond a casual friend. It is a term that implies deep union. Dr. Marvin Meyer, a professor of biblical and Christian studies at Chapman University and a primary translator of the Nag Hammadi texts, points out that the Gospel of Philip discusses marriage extensively as a sacred sacrament. The text frames marriage as a spiritual bridal chamber, a mystery of divine union. Within this context, the relationship between Jesus and Mary Magdalene is presented not as scandalous, but as the archetypal model of sacred partnership. The verse also reveals simmering tension between Mary and the male disciples, particularly Peter. This clash appears in multiple Gnostic texts. In the Gospel of Mary, another Nag Hammadi find, Peter asks Mary directly, "Sister, we know the Savior loved you more than other women. Tell us the words of the Savior which you remember." But when Mary shares private teachings Jesus gave her, Peter lashes out. Did he really speak to a woman privately without our knowledge? Are we all to turn around and listen to her? Did he prefer her over us? Levi, likely Matthew, leaps to Mary's defense. "Peter, you have always been hot-headed. Now I see you competing against the woman as if she were an adversary. But if the Savior made her worthy, who are you to reject her? Why this intense hostility? Simple first-century misogyny? Perhaps, but there is a more disturbing interpretation. If Mary Magdalene was Christ's consort, especially if they had offspring, then she and her children had a legitimate claim to authority over the Christian community that superseded even Peter's. This was a direct existential threat to male apostolic leadership. Dr. Bart Ehrman, professor at the University of North Carolina and a leading expert on early Christianity, explains in Lost Christianities that the first centuries of the faith were a theological battleground between multiple versions of the truth. The version we know today, Orthodox Christianity, did not win because it was truer. It won because it secured the backing of the Roman Empire. Texts that depicted Mary Magdalene as the premier apostle were systematically stifled. Texts that discussed her intimate relationship with Jesus were branded as heresy, and any mention of potential descendants was eradicated. Yet, the manuscripts buried in the Egyptian desert survived 1,600 years in sealed jars. And now, we know precisely what they tried to obliterate. If these revelations are striking a chord deep within your soul, I invite you to join our exclusive members club. Here, you will find a fellowship of seekers who, like you, refuse to settle for half-truths. Become a member now. Let us present evidence number 5. The historical moment when the narrative concerning Jesus' family was officially suppressed. In 325 AD, the Emperor Constantine summoned over 300 bishops to the Council of Nicaea in modern-day Turkey. Officially, the goal was to resolve the Arian debate over the nature of Christ. Was he divine or was he created? But there was a deeper political agenda: to unify Christianity under an imperial model that served the interests of Rome. To grasp what went down at Nicaea, we must understand the political stakes. Constantine wasn't a theologian. He was a master imperial strategist who realized that Christianity, which already represented approximately 10% of the empire, could be weaponized as a powerful tool for social control if it was centralized and uniform. The decentralized model of autonomous family churches and communities, especially those led by despots who claimed authority based on bloodline, was entirely incompatible with a centralized empire. Eusebius of Caesarea, who was present at the council, describes in his Life of Constantine how the emperor presided over the sessions and actively participated in theological debates. Constantine wasn't just pursuing doctrinal orthodoxy, he was demanding institutional uniformity. Although the Council of Nicaea primarily focused on defining the nature of Christ and condemning Arianism, it marked the beginning of a standardization process that would, in the following decades, lead to the systematic suppression of alternative texts. According to the testimony of Socrates Scholasticus, a 5th-century Christian historian, many books were removed from circulation in the years following Nicaea. Among them, according to multiple patristic sources, were texts that spoke extensively about Jesus' family. Saint Athanasius, Bishop of Alexandria, wrote in his festal letter of 367 AD, the first complete list of the 27 books of the New Testament we recognize today. Significantly, Athanasius, in that very same letter, mandates that all other texts be destroyed as apocryphal and heretical. What did these forbidden texts contain? Many discussed Mary Magdalene. Many presented Gnostic teachings, and some, according to fragments that survived, spoke of Jesus' family and lineage. The Decretum Gelasianum, a 6th-century document attributed to Pope Gelasius I, lists 64 prohibited books. Among them, the Gospel of Mary, the Gospel of Philip, the Acts of Peter, and infancy narratives of Jesus that mentioned his brothers. Why this sweeping suppression? The ecclesiastical historian Dr. Henry Chadwick, in his work, The Early Churches, explains that Rome needed to establish a chain of apostolic authority based on institutional ordination, not blood descent. If Jesus' family had legitimate descendants, then the papal model, where the Bishop of Rome claimed supreme authority based on Peter's succession, would become untenable. Imagine the explosive conflict: a direct descendant of Jesus arriving in Rome and stating, "The Messiah's blood flows through my veins. I have the rightful claim to lead this church." That claim would have been utterly devastating to the power structure Rome was meticulously building. So the solution was brutally simple: eliminate any documentary evidence that such a bloodline existed. The Theodosian Code of 438 AD decreed severe penalties for anyone possessing or copying heretical texts. Possession of non-canonical Gospels became a capital crime, punishable by property confiscation, exile, or death. For the next centuries, inquisitors meticulously sought out and destroyed every manuscript that contradicted the Orthodox narrative. That is why the Nag Hammadi discovery in 1945 was so extraordinary. Those texts were buried around 390 AD, likely by monks who knew the destruction order was coming. They hid them in sealed desert jars, hoping that someday the truth might surface, and 1,555 years later, an Egyptian farmer found them. The question you must ask yourself is this: if these texts were merely groundless heresies, why the massive centuries-long effort to eradicate them? What were they terrified you might discover? You don't have to carry that burden alone anymore. Awaken to the forgotten truths with the digital exposé: why the apostles buried Jesus' most dangerous words. The link is right there in the pinned comment. Hit that button now and claim your copy before it vanishes. Let us present evidence number 6. The European traditions that preserve the memory of Jesus' offspring. The evidence doesn't stop with ancient manuscripts. There are enduring European traditions that, though admittedly tangled with medieval folklore, persistently point toward the same conclusion: that Jesus' family did not vanish but dispersed. According to legends in southern France, Mary Magdalene, along with other followers of Jesus, fled the Holy Land after the crucifixion, arriving by boat on the shores of Provence. The site where they supposedly landed, Sainte-Marie de la Mer, still honors this tradition. Jacobus de Voragine's Golden Legend, 13th century, documents that Mary Magdalene spent her final years in a cave in Sainte-Baume. In 1279, Charles II of Anjou ordered excavations in the crypt of Saint-Maximin-la-Sainte-Baume. According to records of the time, a sarcophagus was found bearing the inscription, "Here lies the body of the Blessed Mary Magdalene." Those relics still exist, and the Catholic Church recognizes them as authentic. But here is the chilling implication. If Mary Magdalene arrived in France, did she arrive alone, or did she bring Jesus' descendants with her? The Merovingian dynasty, which ruled portions of Gaul between the 5th and 8th centuries, brazenly claimed direct descent from a sacred lineage stretching back to King David. According to medieval texts safeguarded in French archives, the Merovingians possessed secret genealogical documents that proved their connection to the house of David. Through Jesus, however, we must be clear, there is no solid contemporary documentary evidence to substantiate the Merovingian claims of direct descent from Jesus. The documents supposedly proving this connection have never been verified by independent historians. The French historian Gérard de Sède investigated the mysteries of the Languedoc region for decades, particularly the enigma of Rennes-le-Château. In 1891, the priest Béranger Saunière supposedly found hidden parchments during renovations in his church. Following this discovery, Saunière, who had lived in poverty, began spending astronomical sums of money, whose origin he never explained. The Priory of Sion, the supposed secret society guarding this knowledge, was exposed in 1993 as a modern fabrication engineered by Pierre Plantard in the 1950s. The priory documents were proven forgeries. So why mention a modern fraud? Because 20th century hoaxes do not invalidate authentic medieval traditions. The legend of Mary Magdalene in France predates Plantard by centuries. The Merovingian claims of Davidic lineage are documented in genuine medieval chronicles. And the European noble families who displayed Christological symbolism on their heraldic shields, the fleur-de-lis, symbols of the Sangreal, truly existed. Dr. Margaret Starbird, author of The Woman with the Alabaster Jar, argues that European medieval iconography is saturated with symbols pointing toward a sacred bride and a lost bloodline. Chalices, roses, depictions of Magdalene in religious paintings, all possible visual codes for knowledge that could not be openly expressed. The significance is not whether the Merovingians were truly descendants of Jesus, they likely were not, but that the legend persisted for a millennium. When an oral tradition persists across a millennium, when noble families risked everything claiming this forbidden ancestry, when the Church reacted with inquisitorial fury against these assertions, we must ask, What ancestral memory was being preserved, however distorted? What historical seed gave rise to these enduring legends? Where are you watching this video from? It thrills me to know these truths are reaching thirsty souls worldwide. Drop your country or city below. Let's form a global network of truth seekers. Let us present evidence number 7, the pattern of calculated strategic omissions in the writings of the early church fathers. When you examine the patristic texts with a forensic eye, a disquieting pattern emerges. The earliest Christian theologians, Origen, Tertullian, Jerome, Clement of Alexandria, wrote extensively about almost every aspect of Jesus' life, except about his family after the crucifixion. Origen of Alexandria, 185–254 AD, one of the most prolific theologians of antiquity, wrote thousands of pages of biblical commentary. He debated the virginity of Mary, the nature of the resurrection, the miracles, the parables, the chronology of the Passion. But when he reaches the topic of Jesus' brothers, his discourse becomes strangely evasive. In his commentary on Matthew, Origen argues that brothers must be interpreted as cousins or distant relatives, contradicting the clear use of the Greek adelphoi, biological siblings. Why the aggressive linguistic gymnastics? Because by the 3rd century, the doctrine of Mary's perpetual virginity was being cemented. Acknowledging that Jesus had biological siblings compromised this emerging theology. Tertullian of Carthage, 155–220 AD, a fierce defender of orthodoxy, wrote treatises condemning all manner of heresies. He attacked Gnostics, Marcionites, Valentinians, but when it comes to the Desposini, his silence is deafening. Jerome, 347–420 AD, translator of the Latin Vulgate, faced this problem head-on. Helvidius, a contemporary theologian, argued that the Gospels plainly stated Jesus had siblings born to Mary after his birth. Jerome responded with a furious treatise, De Perpetua Virginitate Mariae, arguing tortuously that brothers meant cousins or children of a widowed Joseph from a previous marriage. But note what Jerome does not do. He does not explain what happened to those cousins or stepbrothers after the resurrection. He does not list their full names. He does not trace their fate. He simply makes them disappear from the narrative. Clement of Alexandria, 150–215 AD, is a particularly fascinating case. In his Stromata, Miscellanies, Clement cites traditions about the apostles and their families. He mentions that Peter was married, that Philip had daughters, but when it comes to Jesus' family post-crucifixion, his references are fragmented and confusing. The pattern holds detailed information about everything except Jesus' family after 33 AD. Now compare this silence with how the fathers documented the families of other Christian leaders. Paul, we know about his sister and nephew, Acts 23:16. Peter, we know he was married, Matthew 8:14. Philip the evangelist, we know he had 4 virgin daughters who prophesied, Acts 21:9. But concerning Jesus' siblings after the crucifixion, silence. About his nephews, the grandchildren of Judas mentioned by Hegesippus, a brief mention, and then nothing. About any possible direct descendants, as if they never existed. This silence is not accidental. It is calculated and strategic. Dr. James D. Tabor, professor of religious studies at the University of North Carolina, argues in The Jesus Dynasty that there is compelling evidence of a deliberate suppression of information about Jesus' family. Tabor points out that Jewish texts of the period, like the Talmud, do mention Jesus' family, sometimes hostilely, but at least they acknowledge their existence. However, the Orthodox Christian texts progressively erased these references. Why? Because a visible, active, and potentially prolific family of Jesus was entirely incompatible with the development of Orthodox Christology, which emphasized his transcendent, celibate divine nature. A Jesus with a wife, children, grandchildren, a whole dynastic lineage. It was just too human, too inherently Jewish, too rooted in the terrestrial world. The fix? Chillingly simple. Omit it, dismiss it, and eventually let it fade into oblivion. But silences in historical texts often shout louder than any pronouncement. You don't have to bear this burden alone anymore. Unlock these forgotten truths with the digital book, Why Did the Apostles Conceal Jesus' Most Dangerous Words? The link is in the first pinned comment. Click now and secure your copy before they attempt to have it removed. Now, we present Evidence number 8. What the Eastern Christian churches safeguarded while the West crushed it. The truth is an overlooked and fascinating reality. The Christian communions that developed outside the direct oversight of Rome, the Syriac, Coptic, Ethiopian, Armenian, and Assyrian churches, retained traditions and texts concerning Jesus and his family that the Roman Catholic Church found utterly inconvenient. Why? Because these Eastern communities never underwent the same intensive theological and political filtering process applied by the Western councils. They developed their own canons, preserved their own gospel accounts, and maintained their own independent traditions. Let's start with the Ethiopian Orthodox Church. The Ethiopian Bible boasts 81 books, more than any other Christian tradition. It includes complete texts like the Book of Enoch, of which only fragments survive in Greek and Aramaic, and the Book of Jubilees. But most significantly, they enshrined both written and oral traditions regarding Jesus' kinship that Rome never managed to sanitize. According to Dr. Ephraim Isaac, a leading expert on Ethiopian manuscripts, these communities preserved legends concerning Jesus' relatives traveling south into Africa following the destruction of Jerusalem in 70 AD. The Assyrian Church of the East, often misleadingly labeled Nestorian, which flourished from Syria across to India and China, maintained ancient Syriac texts that speak extensively of Jesus' family. The Proto-Evangelium of James, which narrates the childhood of Mary and Jesus' siblings, was widely accepted in Eastern traditions while actively discouraged in the West. This text presented the brothers of Jesus as children from Joseph's previous marriage, an explanation that simultaneously protected Mary's perpetual virginity while acknowledging the existence of siblings. Significantly, the Assyrian Church explicitly observes the Day of the Lord's Brethren on December 26th, honoring James, Joseph, Simon, and Jude as either Jesus' full or half-siblings. Syriac manuscripts of the Gospel according to the Hebrews, now lost except for fragments cited by church fathers, apparently contained extensive material about James, the brother of Jesus. Jerome, who had access to this Gospel, wrote that James was a central figure in the text. The historian Robert Eisenman has argued that early Judeo-Christian communities, especially those who fled to Pella after Jerusalem's fall, preserved family traditions that were eventually transmitted to Syriac communities. The Coptic Church in Egypt preserved the Nag Hammadi texts precisely because they were geographically beyond the immediate reach of Roman inquisitors. When the decree came in the 4th century to destroy heretical writings, Coptic monks chose to inter them rather than burn them. These texts include the Gospel of Mary Magdalene, the Gospel of Philip, and the Gospel of Thomas, all preserving traditions about Jesus' family and close companions that Rome intended to eradicate. The Codex Coridethi, a Greek manuscript from the 9th century preserved in Georgia, contains textual variants of the Gospels that mention Jesus' family in greater detail than the Western versions. While these variants are subtle, they powerfully suggest that Eastern textual traditions preserved information that the West edited out. Why did the East preserve what the West suppressed? Dr. Samuel Hugh Moffat, in his monumental work, A History of Christianity in Asia, explains that Asian churches never experienced the fusion of imperial power and ecclesiastical authority that characterized post-Constantinian Western Christianity. In the East, Christianity remained a persecuted or tolerated minority, lacking the state power required to enforce theological uniformity. This allowed multiple traditions to coexist. In the West, Rome wielded both the power and the requisite political motivation to quash inconvenient narratives. Thus, while Gospels were being burned, and possessors of forbidden texts were being persecuted in Rome, in Ethiopia, Syria, Armenia, and India, monks were patiently copying manuscripts that preserved a more complete memory of Jesus, his family, and his teachings. Today, when we study early Christianity, we cannot limit ourselves solely to Roman sources. We must examine what the East preserved, because there, far from the reach of the inquisitors, the family of Jesus was not entirely scrubbed. Their names, their stories, their descendants, they lingered in memory. Did you know that the Eastern churches preserved information that the West deleted? What do you believe accounts for this fundamental difference between East and West? Debate in the comments below. Now we move to the core of this investigation. Evidence number 9. The name systematically wiped from all official records. Judah, son of Jesus. Let's return to the Talpiot tomb. Among the ossuaries discovered, one bore the Aramaic inscription, Yehuda bar Yeshua, Judah, son of Jesus. This ossuary is a confirmed reality. It is logged by the Israel Antiquities Authority under number IAA 8509. It is not myth. It is not a forgery. It is a tangible artifact you can examine in academic photos. The question is both simple and devastating. If Jesus had no children, whose bones are these? Skeptics argue that Yeshua, Jesus, and Yehuda, Judah, were common names in 1st century Judea. True enough, but let's revisit the context of that tomb. Yeshua bar Yehoseph, Jesus son of Joseph, Maria, Mary, Mariamne, Magdalene, Mattia, Matthew, Yose, Joseph, Jesus' brother according to Mark 6:3, Yehuda bar Yeshua, Judah, son of Jesus. We are not talking about a solitary, random coincidence of names. We are talking about a statistical clustering that aligns uncannily with the known immediate family of Jesus of Nazareth. Now, the most unsettling realization: no canonical text mentions that Jesus had a son named Judah. None. But they also don't mention that he didn't. The Gospels simply maintain a profound silence about Jesus' personal life in this regard. They assume celibacy without ever explicitly declaring it. However, in the 1st century Jewish world, celibacy was profoundly rare. Rabbis were married. It was expected. A 30-year-old Jewish man without a wife would have been an anomaly, likely facing community censure. The Talmud is explicit. A man without a wife is not a complete man. Yevamot 63a. The Essenes of Qumran practiced celibacy, but they were viewed as radicals. Mainstream Judaism considered marriage a sacred obligation. So why do we assume Jesus was celibate? Because later Christian theology, heavily influenced by Greco-Roman asceticism and the Platonic philosophy that scorned the body, reinterpreted Jesus as celibate. But there is no direct biblical evidence for this. In fact, Paul, the only apostle who discusses celibacy, states in 1 Corinthians 9:5, "Do we not have the right to take along a believing wife, as do the other apostles and the brothers of the Lord and Cephas?" Read that closely. Paul distinguishes between the other apostles, the Lord's brothers, and Cephas and Peter, and he confirms that all of them had wives. If Jesus' brothers were married, why would Jesus, the eldest, the figurehead, be an exception? Let's return to the name Judah. In 1st century Judaism, names carried deep resonance. Yehuda, Judah, means praised or praise of God. It was the name of the tribe of David, the Messianic tribe. If Jesus, descendant of David, proclaimed Messiah, had a son, what name would be more appropriate than Judah? The name that connected directly to the royal tribe of Israel. But here is the catch. Following the infamous betrayal by Judas Iscariot, the name Judah became tainted within nascent Christian communities. Early Christians avoided the name. It morphed into a synonym for treachery. So if Jesus had a son named Judah, born prior to the crucifixion, the early followers would have faced a devastating dilemma. How do you honor the son of the Messiah, who bears the name of the ultimate traitor? The simplest solution: do not mention the child, protect him, keep his existence secret. And after several generations, when the family dispersed, when Roman persecutions exterminated records, when the institutional church decided Jesus' family was too inconvenient, the name was simply wiped clean, except on one ossuary in a family tomb in Talpiot, where it lay etched in limestone, silent, waiting 2,000 years for someone to ask the right question. Whose bones are these? And if they truly are the remains of Jesus' son, then everything you were taught about the life of Christ has a chapter that was withheld from you. Now let's connect all the evidence and answer the central question. Why did the institutional church need to suppress the existence of Jesus' family and lineage? The answer is political, theological, and intensely human: power. In Second Temple Judaism, religious authority was conveyed through two channels: priesthood, Levitical lineage, and royalty, Davidic lineage. The expected Messiah would combine both. He would be the king-priest after the order of Melchizedek. If Jesus was the Davidic Messiah, then his direct descendants held a legitimate claim to leadership over the Messianic people. This was authority by blood. charismatic, undisputed. The testimonies, Jesus' relatives, understood this perfectly. That is why James led the Jerusalem church. That is why he was succeeded by Simeon, his cousin. It was a dynasty, but Christianity was expanding into the Gentile world, and the Gentile world did not operate on Jewish messianic dynasties. It operated on Roman imperial institutions. When Paul carried the gospel to the Gentiles, he introduced a different model of authority, apostolic authority based on calling and ordination, not genetics. Peter, Paul, Apollos, none were related to Jesus. Their authority derived from being witnesses to the resurrection or receiving direct revelation. This model was infinitely exportable. Anyone could be consecrated a bishop if the community recognized him. You didn't need to be a descendant of David or a relative of Jesus. Eventually, two competing models of Christian leadership emerged. Model A, family dynasty, Jerusalem. Testimonies, leadership, authority based on bloodline. Strongly Jewish focus, centered in the Holy Land, limited by genetics. Model B, apostolic succession, Rome, Antioch. Ordained bishops, authority based on institutional charisma, universally exportable, centered wherever communities existed, geographically unlimited. Which do you think survived? Model B won for practical reasons. It was scalable. Rome could appoint bishops in Alexandria, Antioch, or Carthage without needing to send descendants of Jesus. But there was a problem. As long as visible testimonies existed, claiming authority by blood, the institutional model would be constantly challenged. Picture this. The year is 250 AD. A Roman bishop claims jurisdiction over a region's churches. A direct descendant of Jesus appears and states, "I am the great-grandson of the Messiah's brother. My authority supersedes yours." Utter chaos. The solution was inevitable. Eliminate the dynastic threat. This did not require a conscious conspiracy. It was an organic process driven by institutional self-interest. They simply stopped mentioning the family. They stopped recording their movements. They stopped preserving their texts. And when Gospels surfaced that spoke of Mary Magdalene as Jesus' companion, as the mother of his lineage, as an apostolic leader, those texts were declared heretical. Because admitting that Mary Magdalene was Jesus' wife meant acknowledging possible progeny, and progeny meant dynasty, and dynasty meant a threat to Rome. The theologian Hans Kung, in his work Christianity, Essence, History and Future, argues that one of the greatest ruptures in Christian history was the metamorphosis of a Jewish messianic movement into a Roman imperial religion. That transformation required dismantling Jewish authority structures, including familial authority, and replacing them with Hellenistic institutional structures. Jesus' family was swept away in that process, not through malice, not through a diabolical plot, but by the cold logic of institutional power that recognized a Jewish messianic dynasty was fundamentally incompatible with a global Christian empire. So they erased the names, they suppressed the texts, and they rewrote history. Until ossuaries buried at Talpiot, manuscripts hidden in Egyptian jars, and traditions preserved in Eastern churches began to whisper the truth that had been silenced. The family of Jesus did not vanish. They were intentionally erased. We have examined 9 key pieces of evidence throughout this investigation. It is time to present the historical verdict based on the data we have analyzed. Evidence number 1. Genealogical records that abruptly cease after 135 AD. Evidence number 2. Testimonies from Hegesippus and Eusebius regarding the testimonies leading the early church. Evidence number 3. The Talpiot ossuary bearing the names Yeshua bar Yehoseph, Maria, Mariamne, and Yehuda bar Yeshua. Evidence number 4. The Gospel of Philip describing Mary Magdalene as Jesus' companion. Evidence number 5. The systematic suppression of texts initiated after the Council of Nicaea and formalized in subsequent councils. Evidence number 6. Medieval European traditions regarding Jesus' lineage in France. Evidence number 7. Strategic silences in the writings of the Church Fathers concerning the post-crucifixion family. Evidence number 8. Eastern traditions that preserved information suppressed in the West. Evidence number 9. The name Judah, son of Jesus, etched in stone on a first-century ossuary. When you examine these evidences in isolation, each one can be challenged. Skeptics can argue coincidence, common names, or unreliable traditions. But when you examine them collectively, an undeniable pattern emerges. Jesus' family, and specifically his potential descendants, were systematically expunged from the historical record for theological and political reasons. Is this definitive proof? No. Ancient history rarely offers absolute certainty. Is it sufficient evidence to critically question the official narrative? Absolutely. The historical standard is not absolute certainty. It is the preponderance of evidence. And the preponderance of evidence strongly suggests that the story of Jesus you were taught is incomplete. Here is what we can assert with confidence based on verifiable sources. Jesus had full or half siblings. This is documented in canonical Gospels. James, the brother of Jesus, led the Jerusalem church, confirmed by Acts, Paul, and Josephus. Jesus' family, desposini, were prominent in early Christianity up to the 2nd century, testified by Hegesippus via Eusebius. Gnostic texts present Mary Magdalene as Jesus' intimate companion. Gospel of Philip, Gospel of Mary. A first-century ossuary in Jerusalem bears the name Judah, son of Jesus, catalogued by Israeli authorities. The institutional church systematically suppressed texts about Jesus' family, documented in conciliar and patristic decrees. Now, what does this mean for your faith? Here is the beautiful paradox. Knowing the full humanity of Jesus, including potential marriage and a family, does not diminish his divinity. It makes him more tangible, more relatable, more understandable. A Jesus who loved a woman, who perhaps raised children, who experienced the entirety of human existence, including familial bonds. That is a Jesus who truly understands what it means to be human. Hebrews 4:15 states, "For we do not have a high priest who is unable to empathize with our weaknesses, but one who was in every respect tempted as we are." If Jesus experienced all dimensions of human life, including romantic love and fatherhood, then he truly was tempted in every respect as we are. The suppression of the narrative we inherited failed to protect the true integrity of Jesus. Instead, it manufactured a sterilized, disembodied version, one that neatly served institutional machinery, but utterly divorced Christ from the totality of the human experience. The truth is not the enemy of belief. It is its cornerstone. If your faith demands a historical blind spot, is it truly conviction, or is it simply fear dressed up as piety? Early Christianity was a sprawling, messy, profoundly human endeavor. There were vicious debates, ideological conflicts, and polyphonic interpretations. And amidst that diversity, there was a family, Jesus' own kin, who led the charge, who served the movement, and who were eventually lost to the annals of history. But the ossuaries do not lie. Buried manuscripts do not simply disappear. Traditions preserved in distant, isolated churches do not just evaporate into thin air. And now, you know the name that was scrubbed from the ledgers. Judah. Judah, the son of Jesus. Did he walk among them? The weight of the evidence is stacking up, suggesting an undeniable yes. But even if you resist that staggering implication, you now understand that there are vital questions demanding to be asked. Questions that the ecclesiastical establishment would much prefer you never whisper aloud, because questions lead to deep dives. Deep dives lead to unearthed findings, and unearthed findings expose reality. Realities that have been lying dormant for 2,000 years, waiting for their moment to break the silence. And now that you've heard them, what will you do with this knowledge? Hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell so you don't miss a single revelation. Don't skip the next video where we will continue to pull back the curtain on truths that have remained hidden for centuries. And if you truly feel the call to embark on this deep dive, consider becoming a member. These guardians of the truth are already accessing insider knowledge that we can never make public. Thank you for watching this video to the very end. You have participated in an investigation few dare to conduct. May the truth illuminate your path. We'll meet again in the next video.